The Naskapi occupy a unique space in the ethnographic landscape of North America. Linguistically and culturally part of the Innu-Montagnais complex, they are distinguished by their adaptation to the harsh, treeless interior of the Labrador Peninsula. The term Naskapi itself is a subject of historical layering. Early Jesuit missionaries and French explorers used it to describe the groups living beyond the reach of the St. Lawrence settlements. While some historical etymologies suggest a pejorative meaning, rude or uncivilized, derived from the dialects of their southern neighbors, the Naskapi have reclaimed and redefined their identity. In their own language, Iyibu-Imun, they have historically referred to themselves as Nenanut, meaning true people or real people. Today, the term Naskapi is embraced with pride, often interpreted poetically as people beyond the horizon or people of the place where the land disappears. This name perfectly encapsulates their geographic reality, a people inhabiting the barren grounds, the vast subarctic tundra where the boreal forest thins and vanishes into the lichen-covered plateau. The traditional territory of the Naskapi, known as Stasinu, our land, is a landscape of stark beauty and unforgiving extremes. It encompasses the interior plateau of northern Quebec and Labrador, a region defined by the Canadian Shield. This is a land of rock, water, and sky, characterized by a biome of permafrost, lichen woodlands, and erratic boulders left by retreating glaciers, an intricate network of lakes and rivers, including the Kanya-Piscau and the George River, which served as the arteries of Naskapi travel. Long, brutal winters where temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Celsius and short, intense summers where the tundra explodes with life and insect activity. Unlike the Montagnais to the south, who could rely on the moose and beaver of the dense forest, or the Inuit to the north, who harvested the rich marine resources of the coast, the Naskapi occupied the middle ground, the interior interface. This isolation protected them from early European contact, but also made their survival entirely dependent on a single migratory resource, the caribou. To understand the Naskapi is to understand the caribou. This relationship was not merely economic, it was the central axis of their cosmology. The Naskapi world was animistic, alive with spirits, Manitou, inhabiting every rock, river, and animal. In this worldview, hunting was not a physical act of domination, but a spiritual transaction of reciprocity. The caribou were viewed as sentient beings with their own society and agency. They were not caught, they gave themselves to the hunter. This gift required the hunter to be in a state of spiritual grace. The animals would only surrender their bodies to those who respected them, treated their remains with dignity, and honored their spirits through ritual. The Mishtapeyu, the great man. Every individual possessed a Mishtapeyu, a great man or spirit helper, often described as an external soul or a connection to the spirit world. The Mishtapeyu communicated with the hunter through dreams, guiding them to the location of the herds. A hunter with a strong connection to his Mishtapeyu was a powerful provider. The Mishtapeyu acted as an interpreter, translating the language of the animal spirits into human understanding. The theology of the bullet. This spiritual relationship extended even to modern technology. When firearms were introduced, they were integrated into the animistic framework. Naskapi elders taught that every animal can see the bullet when it comes towards him. If the hunter was respectful, the caribou spirit would catch the bullet, accepting death as a gift to the human. If the hunter was disrespectful, the animal would simply step aside and the bullet would miss, regardless of the marksman's skill. The primary mechanism for communicating with the spirit world was the kusapachigan, or shaking tent. This ritual was performed by a shaman, Kamantoit, to seek guidance during times of scarcity. The structure. A cylindrical tent constructed of poles and covered with hides. The shaman would enter the tent and the community would gather outside. The spirits, including the Mishtapeyu and animal spirits, would enter the tent to converse with the shaman. The presence of the spirits was manifested by the violent shaking of the tent structure and a cacophony of voices, the growls of bears, the cries of eagles, and the drumming of caribou hooves. Through the Mishtapeyu, the spirits would reveal the location of the caribou, pointing out specific landmarks on the tundra. The most sacred sacrament of the Naskapi is the Mokoshan, a communal feast honoring the caribou spirit. It is a ritual of renewal and thanksgiving. The substance. The focal point of the feast is the consumption of caribou bone marrow, winupak. The long bones of the caribou are crushed and boiled to extract the rich fat, which is then eaten by all members of the band. By consuming the marrow, the very essence of the animal's life force, the Naskapi reaffirmed their bond with the Katipenimitach, the lord of the caribou. The ritual required absolute reverence. The bones had to be handled carefully and disposed of in a specific manner, often burned or hung in trees, to prevent them from being desecrated by dogs. It was believed that if the bones were treated properly, the caribou would be reincarnated and returned to the hunters. Elders recount seeing fathers prepare a little mokoshan even with a caribou neck during starving times. The act of gratitude, even for a small kill, was believed to unlock the grace of the spirits for future hunts. Between 1700 and 1930, the Naskapi created one of the most visually stunning traditions in indigenous North American art, the painted caribou skin coat. While these coats are now prized museum artifacts, their original purpose was functional and spiritual. They were hunting technology designed to influence the outcome of the chase. The dream origin. The intricate geometric designs, double curves, triangles, and linear pathways were not arbitrary. They originated in the dreams of the hunter. The hunter would visualize the patterns that would please the caribou spirits. He would convey these visions to the women of the camp, who were the master artists. The women's artistry. Using tools made of caribou bone and antler, women would paint the tanned hides. The pigments were derived from natural sources. The double curve. Often interpreted by anthropologists as a floral motif, Naskapi elders and scholars suggest it represents the curvature of the caribou's antlers, the ears of the animal, or the spirit of the forest. It is a symbol of life and regeneration. The gusset, the magic mountain. A triangular piece of skin inserted into the back of the coat's skirt was identified by researcher Dorothy Burnham as the magic mountain or sacred mountain. In Naskapi mythology, this is the dwelling place of the master of the caribou, the hollow mountain from which the herds are released into the world each autumn. Wearing the mountain on one's back aligned the hunter with the source of the animals. The strategy. The belief was that the caribou, being a beautiful animal, preferred to be killed by a hunter who was beautifully dressed. The painted coat showed respect. It also acted as spiritual camouflage, disguising the hunter's human form and presenting him as a being integrated with the spiritual landscape. For centuries, the Naskapi remained on the periphery of the European fur trade. Their land, rich in caribou, was poor in beaver and marten furs that drove the colonial economy. However, as the Hudson's Bay Company sought to expand its monopoly into the interior in the 19th century, the Naskapi were drawn into the global market. The HBC established trading posts, Fort Chimo or Kuujjuaq, Fort Naskapi, and Davis Inlet that acted as gravitational centers. The traders viewed the Naskapi as a labor force to be managed. They encouraged the Naskapi to shift their focus from subsistence hunting, caribou, to commercial trapping, furs. This created a dangerous conflict of interest. Time spent trapping furs for the company was time not spent hunting food for the family. The primary mechanism of colonial control was the debt system. The Naskapi became dependent on European goods, firearms, ammunition, metal axes, flour, and tea. To obtain these, they needed credit at the HBC post. This credit could only be paid off with furs. The trap. If a hunter focused on trapping to pay his debt, he might miss the caribou migration and face famine. The squeeze. If a hunter focused on caribou to feed his family, he would have no furs to trade. The HBC managers would often refuse to advance ammunition to delinquent hunters, effectively disarming them and leaving them vulnerable to famine. The Naskapi were treated as pawns on a corporate chessboard. The HBC and later the Canadian government relocated the Naskapi repeatedly to suit logistical needs, often with disastrous consequences for the people's health and food security. The closure of Fort Mackenzie in 1948 was a critical blow. It forced the Naskapi back to Fort Chimo, or Kuujjuaq, where they were culturally marginalized and far from the caribou herds. By the early 1950s, the Naskapi were destitute, relying on government relief rations to survive. Tuberculosis ran rampant, and the proud nomads were reduced to dependency. In 1956, a decision was made that would alter the Naskapi's destiny forever. Whether lured by promises of jobs and housing in the new iron mining town of Shepherdsville, or coerced by government officials tired of supplying relief at Fort Chimo, the Naskapi undertook a mass migration. They traveled overland, a journey of approximately 400 miles, 640 kilometers. It was a harrowing trek. The logistical support that was promised was inadequate. Elders recount the journey as a death march. By the time the group reached Wakuich Lake, 70 miles north of Shepherdsville, they were exhausted, sick, and starving. A rescue operation was launched to transport them the final leg of the journey. Upon arrival in the promised land of Shepherdsville, the Naskapi found no welcome. The town was a closed company enclave for the Iron Ore Company of Canada. The Naskapi were not employees, they were perceived as a nuisance. Initially, they settled in makeshift shacks near the airport at Pierce Lake. In 1957, municipal authorities, citing sanitation concerns, moved them to John Lake, 4 miles outside of town. At John Lake, the Naskapi lived in third-world conditions. There was no electricity, no sewage system, no running water, and no school. They lived in shacks built from scavenged lumber and canvas. They were refugees in their own land, watching the wealth of the iron mines being extracted just miles away while they lived in squalor. In the late 1960s, the Department of Indian Affairs attempted to solve the housing crisis by building the Mattamakosh Reserve near the center of Shefferville. They constructed row houses, a design totally alien to Naskapi culture, which valued privacy and spacing. In 1975, the geopolitical landscape of Quebec changed with the signing of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, JBNQA. This landmark treaty settled the land claims of the Cree and Inuit, paving the way for hydroelectric development. However, the Naskapi were excluded. They were the ghosts of the agreement, physically present in the territory but legally invisible. They received no compensation and no recognition of their rights. Recognizing that exclusion meant extinction as a political entity, the Naskapi leadership mobilized. Led by the visionary chief Joseph Gwanish, they launched a legal and political battle to force the governments of Canada and Quebec to the negotiating table. They argued that their traditional territory, the vast interior, was being affected by the development and that they held unextinguished Aboriginal title. Chief Gwanish, a man deeply rooted in tradition but possessing a sharp political acumen, became the voice of the nation. He, along with other leaders, navigated the complex bureaucracy, demanding that the Naskapi be recognized as a distinct nation separate from the Montagnais. After the Nikua, the Naskapi selected a new site for their village, Kawawachikamash, the Winding River, located 15 kilometers northeast of Shefferville. Construction began in 1980 and was completed by 1983. The Nikua led to the passage of the Cree-Naskapi Act of Quebec in 1984. This revolutionary legislation replaced the Colonial Indian Act for the Naskapi. It made the Naskapi Nation of Kawawachikamash, NNK, a self-governing entity. While many indigenous languages face extinction, Naskapi remains vibrant, though threatened. The dialect, written in syllabics, is the heart of Naskapi identity. In recent years, a spiritual repatriation has begun. The painted caribou skin coats, held for centuries in museums in Europe and southern Canada, are being studied and reproduced. The history of the Naskapi is a dramatic arc of survival. They began as the lords of the caribou, masters of a landscape that European explorers found uninhabitable. They endured the slow violence of the fur trade, which eroded their autonomy, and the acute trauma of the era of relocations, which nearly destroyed them as a people. The tragedy of Shefferville, the starvation, the shacks at John Lake, the marginalization, could have been the end of the Naskapi story. Instead, it became the crucible for their rebirth. Through the leadership of figures like Joseph Gwanish and the collective will of the community, they forced the Canadian state to recognize their existence. Today, Kawawachikamash stands as a testament to that resilience. It is a modern village where the internet connects the youth to the world, but where the school still teaches the syllabics of the ancestors. It is a place where the Naskapi Development Corporation manages multi-million-dollar contracts, but where the Mokashan feast is still held to honor the spirit of the caribou.
The Naskapi have proven that they are indeed the Nenenat, the true people. They have not only survived the horizon, they have expanded it, ensuring that their children can walk proudly in both the world of the tundra and the world of the boardroom, wrapped in the spiritual protection of their heritage.